I've also popped on this slide my email address, so if after this session you think, oh, I wish I'd asked Pet this, then do drop me an email, and I'll try and get back to you. Anything English based, nothing maths. So anything English based, then drop me an email. So today we are going to be looking at let me find my, here we go. We are going to be looking at primary English leadership spring briefing, and we're going to be looking at important dates for the school diary. Now, I've put that at the end of the session, just in case we run out of time, but all the dates are there with links to useful websites to support some of those key dates for English this term. We're going to start off by looking at Ofsted's deep dive in reading. So we've been collecting, over the last sort of few years, we've been collecting information from schools who have been Ofsteded, and we're going to be looking at unpicking some of those key tips from subject leaders and head teachers with regards to that reading deep dive in particular today. And then the second part of the session, we're going to be looking at improving writing. So it's top tips, looking at the research into effective teaching and learning of writing. We're going to be unpicking some of that today too. So I've only got you guys for an hour, but hopefully we'll be able to cover all of that today. So we're going to start off with just top tips in terms of Ofsted's deep dive. So first of all, just thinking about reading for pleasure. Now I know from talking to schools who have been Ofsteded that Ofsted are focusing on how schools are developing reading for pleasure. So it's a key question to subject leaders thinking about, well, what do you do as a school in terms of developing reading for pleasure? So this quote comes from the OECD, so the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development, and it reflects all of the research in terms of becoming a successful reader. So reading for pleasure is the single biggest indicator of a child's future success. So more than their family circumstances, their parents' educational background, or their income. So reading for pleasure, we know reading for pleasure actually has an impact in terms of how children do across the curriculum. It also has an impact in terms of how children do in terms of life chances. So really important that as a school, yes, we're focusing in on how we're teaching reading and supporting children to become successful readers in terms of the technical side of reading. We want children who can read, but also we want children who choose to read. And one of the tips from schools is about, yes, we need that rigorous systematic phonics program in the early stages, and I'm absolutely signed up to that. We're one of the approved training providers for one of the DFE validated systematic phonic programs, Smart Kids, the code. So I'm signed up to that. I know it makes a difference. But alongside that, we need a systematic, rigorous, strategic program for developing reading for pleasure. So as leaders of English, thinking about, okay, what are the things that we do to make sure that our children, to promote that reading for enjoyment and reading for pleasure. So just as important as that rigorous, systematic, strategic approach in terms of developing that reading for pleasure. Oh, I've just noticed that we've got chat. Oh, okay. That's absolutely fine. Thank you. No problem. Thank you. So developing reading for pleasure. Now we know that fluency is absolutely essential to enjoyment. So one of the things that has come up from schools is that we need to make sure that we're focusing on fluency, and we're thinking about how do we develop fluency as a school. It's in the research, fluency is quite often described as the neglected skill, but I think actually there has been a spotlight on fluency in recent years. So this comes from the reading framework, this quote: as children gain fluency, their motivation increases. They start to enjoy reading more and are willing to do more of it. So we know from our own experiences in the classroom that gaining fluency impacts on children's enjoyment in reading, because they're able to roll the film in their brain. Essentially, they're able to convert that printed text into pictures in their mind. So there's been a little bit of a mismatch in terms of, or misconception in terms of fluency in recent years. So I think particularly from the government, from the Standards and Testing Agency, where they had that bullet point on the end of the end of Key Stage 1 assessment, which said reading at 90 words a minute, you know, in terms of being a fluent reader. Now that's gone from the assessment framework, thank goodness. 90 words a minute gives us an indication, it's a rough guideline, but actually fluency, of course, is so much more than speed. Fluent readers read with accuracy. So, you know, we can't be fluent unless we're accurate. In that accuracy, in terms of decoding, that leads us to automaticity, and that's what we want. We want to build up the number of words that children can recognize at a glance, so that they're not consciously decoding through the word. So we want accuracy, we want an awareness of punctuation, we want an appropriate speed, and the research tells us that's at a conversational rate. So we want to help children to make their reading sound like speaking, essentially, and we want that expression. When you unpick the research into fluency, the strategies that are said to be effective, the simplest strategies work. Firstly, model. You know, children mimic. So if we do it, they do it. So lots of demonstration of reading aloud, of course, and talking about our reading as well, and drawing their attention to what does it look like? How does it sound to be a fluent reader? So yes, unpicking those aspects of fluency in terms of, you know, sharing the rules of the game with them, but making sure that we're just doing lots and lots of modeling. So when we're reading aloud, we're sometimes talking about our reading too. So we're making it explicit for them. So if they're saying things like, did you notice my voice there? What did I do? You know, did you hear how I made the character sound really scared? How did I do it? I'm going to read it to you again. Will you copy me and see if you can read it in exactly the same way as I did? So things like, did you hear how I sped up there and slowed down there? Did you notice how I changed the pitch of my voice to make it sound like I was excited? So you're bringing it to life for the children, but you're really directing them to think about that expression and what it sounds like to be a fluent reader. The other strategy is about repeated reading of text. And I know most of those phonics schemes in the early stages suggest that children reread those closely matched phonically regular books. And I think that's important. You know, mostly we're reading in the early stages, we're reading, first of all, we're decoding. So that'll tends to be quite clunky initially. You know, where children are decoding, they're blending out loud. Oh, sorry, there's a bit there. Thank you. They're reading out loud. They're blending out loud, and it tends to be a bit clunky. The second time we're focusing in a bit more on fluency, and we're trying to make it sound interesting for the reader. You know, we're taking account of the punctuation, we're taking account of phrases and clauses and pauses, and we're bringing the voices to life, etc. And then the third time we read that book, then we're really delving into comprehension. So it depends on the scheme we're using in the early stages. It depends on, you know, what's promoted by that SSP, but we need to be thinking about that in year 2 and year 3 as well. How are we supporting that rereading of text? And there are lots of ways of doing that higher up in the school. So thinking about things like echo reading, choral reading. So there are lots of strategies out there that we can use to focus in on fluency, and particularly for those groups of children in year 2, year 3, and maybe higher up the school who need that support in terms of fluency. The Ofsted say the most important factor explaining variation in pupils' reading fluency is amount of exposure to text. This can include oral exposure to text. So the research tells us that if children are to read fluently, they need to read a lot. So it's about getting the reading miles in too. So engaging parents is essential, and that's one of the tips from schools, is about making sure that we are engaging our parents to support to engage in children's learning. And that's hard for some schools and with certain children, of course, and certain families. However, we need to keep trying, because we know that parental engagement makes a huge difference. One of the things I've seen that work really well with parental engagement is a little tick sheet where you've got your, maybe what we refer to or used to refer to as hard to reach parents. So, you know, who we really want to engage, but don't tend to come to workshops, don't tend to read with their children, etc. But just a little sheet that's just, as a leader, we've got a little sheet that says, okay, what have we tried? You know, and has that worked? What are we trying next? Because of course, Ofsted will be looking at, what have you tried, what's worked, and what are you going to try next? So it's, we're not giving up, we're going to keep going, because we know that parental engagement makes a difference. So really important, because reading, having that rereading at home is going to support that fluency. So reflecting as a school in terms of how much time is dedicated to developing reading fluency. And I see a lot of difference. I'm very lucky. I get to go into lots of different schools, and when I look at timetables, I see a lot of difference from school to school, and sometimes from class to class, in terms of how much time is dedicated to reading in class. You know, how much time is dedicated for the children to practice reading and develop their fluency. And timetables, time is so difficult, and we have, you know, such a lot to fit in terms of primary curriculum. But one of the most important things we do, of course, is support our children to become successful readers. So we need to prioritize that above everything else, actually. I've been working recently with children who are age 16, key stage 3 children who are struggling readers, and in some cases non-readers. And it is devastating, because of course, by the time children get to key stage 3, all their learning, you know, is through reading, essentially, at key stage 3. And so it impacts in terms of everything, in terms of the whole curriculum at key stage 3. So and I'm talking, I did some support on the 2nd of January up in Bristol, and some of those key stage 2 and key stage 3 teachers that I was working with were talking about the impact on self-esteem, on well-being, on mental health, and on, you know, not wanting to come to school. And we need to make sure that we catch children early. And of course, Ofsted are saying within the first 3 weeks of reception, we should be noticing those children who are at risk of falling behind. So in the first 3 weeks of reception, because we know that early intervention is what we want. That's the thing that makes the difference. You know, we know that when children feel like failures, the harder that is to undo. So we need to catch them early, get an additional 5 minutes phonic keep up session so that they know those GPCs at a glance, and 5 minutes additional read, so that we're having that practice. Even if they're not practicing at home, we know that they're getting that practice in school. So how much time is dedicated to developing reading fluency? What strategies are used? So as a school, that consistent approach, you know, do we use echo reading in year 3 for those children who are struggling with their fluency? Maybe they've secured their phonic knowledge, but actually they need to build up that consistent fluent approach. And how do we support our struggling readers in key stage 2 with improving fluency? You know, what strategies are used at key stage 2? So as leadership teams, top tip for Ofsted, it's about being explicit about it. We need to let them know that we know what we're doing in terms of fluency, and we need to let them know what we're doing in terms of developing that reading for pleasure. If you want more support with fluency as a school, if it's something that you think that you would like support with, have a look at our website. We have got online Zoom training, which I run. You can book it individually, and it's on 2-for-1 session at the moment, but you can also book it as a whole school. So there are dates across the year And so all of our whole school training is like this. We have dates across the year, and you can split your bookings so that you can have, you know, teachers coming in January, teaching assistants coming in May. You know, you can book it, you can spread your bookings so that it's not such a it's not so difficult to manage for schools. So do have a look if that's something that could support your school. This comes from the deep dive, and where you had your handout, where you downloaded your handout from that link, there were some other resources. This is one of those deep dive, those 7 deep dive questions. So in that resource, on that resource page, you will have this document which has all the deep dive questions, but we've unpicked those questions just to support you as leaders to have that conversation as a whole school, essentially. So this comes from the deep dive. So stories, poems, rhymes, and non-fiction chosen for reading to develop pupils' vocabulary, language comprehension, and love of reading. Pupils are familiar with and enjoy listening to a wide range of stories, poems, rhymes, and non-fiction. Having that whole school rigorous approach to read aloud is one of the main ways that we really promote that reading for pleasure. And somebody at a conference a while ago now, someone said, I don't have time to read aloud to my class. And my colleague Tree said, you don't have time not to. And it has always stuck with me, and I always share it, because she's right. What children learn from being read to, from, you know, being immersed in beautiful language is priceless. What you're doing is you're inspiring them to want to become readers themselves. You're modeling fluent reading. You're sharing stories you know, that are mirrors to their own lives. You're sharing stories that are windows into other lives. You're developing empathy. You're developing tolerance. You're supporting their comprehension. There is so much. You're expanding their knowledge of the world. There is so much that we do, that we are doing when we're reading aloud to children. So absolutely essential. And unfortunately, not to pick on year 4 teachers here, but this is just the stat that comes from Closing the Reading Gap by Alex Quigley. Now, if you haven't read that, I would suggest that everyone in school needs to read that book. Alex Quigley, fabulous, and now works for the EEF, but that book is great. He says in that book that teachers reported that in the year 4 classroom, only around 15% of teachers read to their class every day. Now, of course, that book was published a few years ago, so I really think that's different now, hopefully. But it's thinking about, actually in our school, our teachers reading aloud every day in class. You know, and sometimes where that read aloud happens can influence that. So sometimes if you have it at the end of the day, sometimes it just falls off the edge, you know. So it's prioritizing that read aloud, I think, is really, really important. And in terms of top tips for Ofsted, I would definitely have that as one of my key strategies for promoting reading for pleasure. Catherine Patterson said it's not enough to simply teach children to read. We have to give them something worth reading, something that will stretch their imaginations, something that will help them make sense of their own lives and encourage them to reach out towards people whose lives are quite different from their own. For me, that's one of the main reasons for reading to children and sharing fabulous books to children, is that, you know, it is one of the key ways that we develop empathy. And in our world at this precise moment in time, we need children who are going to grow up being empathetic and tolerant and kind. And it's one of the key things that we can do. So the importance of quality texts within our curriculum. And lots of schools that I work with have their list as a school, which they've generated together, are not to be missed texts. So by the end of year 6, our children will leave us going into secondary school having experienced this set of core texts through Read Aloud. They're going to experience those. Now, that doesn't need to be set in stone, but it's good if we come together as a staff to think about that, because, you know, sometimes I think having Having everybody engaged in that is really important. And developing that list together so that we have, oh, this is a really good book for read aloud in year 4. Oh, but I really love this one, so I'm going to share this one with my class. Because of course, personal likes is really important as a teacher. If we're inspired by a book, when we read it to our children, we bring it to life for them, because we want, it's about reading with enthusiasm, isn't it? That's the thing that makes the difference. It's that spark that you create when you're enjoying a book and sharing it with your class. So I would absolutely advocate having that list of read alouds and pop that on the website for parents so that they know, they're going to be reading these things in school. And then maybe having another list of, actually these would complement the books that we're reading in school, so that's really nice too. And don't forget non-fiction. Now, Heather Fern, who's HMI, we heard her talk a while ago now, but she said that we need to be reading aloud non-fiction to our class for pleasure. And it's definitely something that I didn't do when I was teaching full-time. I did not read aloud. I didn't think to. We analysed non-fiction to support to support writing, but I never read aloud for pleasure. And actually, when you think about it, Heather Fern's right. Many of our children don't tend to choose non-fiction to read for pleasure, and maybe that's because we don't model it as frequently. Also, our children don't tend to write non-fiction as well, and that's because they're not soaked in the language of non-fiction texts as often. So sumptuous non-fiction, and non-fiction is very different from when I was at school. When we're looking at those non-fiction texts now, they are amazing. If you have any great non-fiction recommendations, pop them on the chat so that everybody else can share. I'll make sure that it's on meeting group chat. Great. So if anyone's got any great non-fiction, pop them in the chat so that we can share. So absolutely reading aloud non-fiction, but also reading aloud poetry every single day. Now, I think this is really important, and Tree and I have worked for a number of years now on our free poem a day project, and it is going to be running again this year, but with recorded training sessions. So if you're interested, do drop us an email. Poem a day is simply signing up to reading a poem a day to your class, and very quickly what you will find doing that is that children start to get interested in poems and start to want to choose poetry to read themselves. They'll bring poetry in to read aloud to the class, and in poetry, children are exposed to so much language, fabulous vocabulary. Thinking about poetry, metaphor, simile really come to life in poetry. And the other thing is it's short, it's quick. It only takes a couple of minutes. You don't necessarily have to analyze it, but we need to share it for enjoyment. So sharing a poem a day and signing up to doing, and if you imagine you're doing that every day in reception, and then they're doing it every day in year 1, just imagine the language and poetry they've been exposed to by the time they leave us in year 6. So it's a quick win, essentially. Ofsted often ask teachers why they've chosen a particular book. So this is another one of the top tips from schools. Be prepared for that, because and we need to know why we're reading aloud those books to our children. So make sure your teachers and your teaching assistants know why. Why are we reading this? What is it about this book? Is it to do with the content? Is it to do with vocabulary? What is it about this book? Why have I chosen it? This comes from Jill Jones, HMI. She says, staff try to develop pupils' love of reading. Storytelling sessions occur daily, and these engage pupils well, but some of the books that staff read to pupils vary in quality. So using high quality books is absolutely key when it comes to improving reading outcomes. We've got to be thinking about our class. We've got to be thinking about what they're interested in. We've got to be thinking about their experience, their background knowledge, etc. How are we going to engage children in reading and developing reading for pleasure? Yeah, really key that teachers and teaching assistants know why have I chosen this for Read Aloud? For leaders, we've got, I think I popped the link for this on your resources list, your resource page. If not, it's on our website. I think it's on your list. Do you recognise this, folks? Yes, great. So this is just a book audit to help us think about the range of books that we've got in our classrooms, in our libraries, in our shared book areas, and just to reflect on that range of books that we're sharing and that we're offering up for children. If you're looking for book recommendations, this list is really nice if we're thinking about improving our book stock, particularly thinking about diversity and inclusion. So this is a nice little list if you're looking for book stock. And these, I always go to these websites too when I'm looking for new books and recommendations. I love these. I'm sure some of you have come across these branching out posters. They're really nice for classrooms, for shared areas. So this is about, okay, if you like Julia Donaldson, you might like these authors. And that's really nice when we're thinking about developing reading for pleasure. We need to know our children, we need to know what they're interested in, what they like reading currently, and what content do they like. So these branching out posters are really nice. And Liverpool Learning Partnership do a similar set of posters. So yeah, really useful. That's the other thing, actually, in terms of reading for pleasure. Alex Quigley talks about nurturing their obsessions. And I love that. And I've seen that with my own little girl. You know, she's obsessed with dogs. And even at about 4 years old, my colleague Tree, Auntie Tree, bought her the 100 Books dog, the 100 Dogs book. And she read it. It was beyond her phonic, decodability, but she read it because she was obsessed with dogs and she was desperate to be able to read that book. So nurture their obsessions, I think, really, really important, and important to share that with parents too, because of course, now in this technological world, I can, if my little one is suddenly interested in owls, I can have a book about owls in her hands the following day with the dreadful Amazon, of course. But nurture their obsessions, key tip from Alex Quigley. The other thing in terms of Ofsted, Reading Ready, is making sure that our environment screams that reading is what we do here. Reading is our priority, not just how children learn to read, but encouraging that reading for pleasure. So this comes from one of our schools in Cornwall, and it's to do with, yes, lovely, gorgeous, enticing reading areas, shared reading areas, classroom reading areas, cozy nooks, etc. Great libraries that the children are excited to go into. However, don't forget this when it comes to reading environment. In the reading framework, it says the books themselves are the most important aspect of any book corner. It should be the words of the stories and not the props that transport children to different worlds. The mysterious forest, the dark and dripping cave, the moated castle. Well-chosen books should capture children's imagination to such an extent that they become unaware of whether they're sitting on a beanbag, an ordinary classroom chair, or a bench in the book corner. Time might therefore be better spent on selecting, displaying, and promoting the books in the book corner than decorating it. So being aware of that, keeping that balance. We want nice environments for our children, but the books are the most important thing. What I'll do is I'll send you out a free recording. Some of you, I'm sure, have seen it already, but Tree, my colleague, runs free training on developing reading for pleasure, and there's a recorded version of a past Zoom event. So it's not super polished, but it's got all the tips in there from Tree in terms of what are we doing to develop that reading for pleasure in schools. So if that's interesting to you, you'll get that following this session. The other aspect, of course, that we can't ignore is the phonics deep dive. And I'm going to unpick this now in terms of being prepared for the questions that Ofsted are likely to ask. So first, that these 3 bullet points come from that reading deep dive, that document that you've got. And I'm going to first of all just look at the last one here. The school has developed sufficient expertise in the teaching of phonics and reading. So the expertise that Ofsted are looking for, 3 types of knowledge essentially highlighted by Ofsted. So the first one is content knowledge. That's what they talk about, content knowledge. So that's to do with teachers' knowledge of the subject they're teaching. So as leaders of English, we need to make sure that we know that all teachers and teaching assistants know what a digraph is, a trigraph, a split digraph. You know, they're using that terminology with the children, or consistent terminology with the children, consistent with your programme. That, you know, at Key Stage 2, when we have teachers and teaching assistants who are supporting that catch-up phonics, you know, those catch-up intervention sessions, that they're using that, you know, the consistent terminology, and that they have that subject knowledge. And that's hard to make sure that that content knowledge is accurate and kept up to date. But content knowledge is part of what Ofsted are looking for and what they mean by this expertise. So content knowledge, so that's subject knowledge. Secondly, it's to do with pedagogical knowledge, and that's to do with general, teaching methods. So effective teaching methods. So general knowledge about what works in terms of teaching generally. So for example, understanding the importance of revisit on a daily basis for phonics, for example. So knowing that if we want children to know GPCs at a glance, then we need to do those every single day. You know, we need to keep coming back to those. So the importance of that revisit review. And then the third type of expertise or knowledge that they're looking for is called pedagogical content knowledge. So that's to do with teachers' knowledge and teaching assistants' knowledge of how to teach the particular subject or topic. So for example, understanding that when we teach phonics, we need to teach blending and segmenting as reversible processes. So it's what pedagogical approaches work best for that particular subject. So those are the 3 aspects they're looking for in terms of that expertise, that subject knowledge. So content knowledge, pedagogical knowledge, that general stuff, and then that subject specific, so pedagogical content knowledge. And Ofsted say, this is from the handbook, teachers have expert knowledge. If they don't, they're supported to address gaps in their knowledge, so pupils are not disadvantaged by ineffective teaching. So I would suggest having a log as an English lead or reading lead or phonics lead, keeping a log of, okay, what have we done to support that expertise in school? So making sure that we've got that to hand, and we can let them know that we've done that. This list we've put together to support schools with sort of reading around the subject, if you like. So keeping our school team up to date is a constant challenge. So we've got some books here, Closing the Reading Gap, I've already mentioned, by Alex Quigley. The Ofsted Research Review series, I'd make sure that all teachers have read that, of course, because it pulls together all of those strands of research. DFE Reading Framework, of course. Reading Teachers, so Nurturing Reading for Pleasure by Teresa Kremen, essential. And this is an interesting one, The Science of Learning. So it goes beyond just English, actually, but 99 studies that every teacher needs to know. That's a good one in terms of pedagogical knowledge. And then as a school, if we're members of UKLA or NATE, fabulous, because they keep us up to date in terms of current research. As leadership teams, what are we looking for in terms of phonics best practice? These are the things that come up in reports. things like active participation from children. So this is, reception, year 1 in particular, and year 2. Active participation, the children, not one child coming up to the board during phonics sessions, so everybody expected to respond. Secure routines, so that we're not explaining loads of activities to children, that children know what's coming and how, we don't want to chase through a load of different crazy activities during phonics. We want secure routines that focus in on phonics subject knowledge, phonic learning. Correct articulation of phonemes still coming up in reports. So making sure that everyone in school is not schwaring, so not putting the on the end of the sound. So not saying n, but saying not saying s, but saying s, for example. Direct teaching sessions, multisensory approach, and just making sure that we're unpicking with everyone in school what is multisensory. With regards to phonics, it's about children hearing the sound, seeing the grapheme, saying the sound, and writing it. So multisensory. So unpicking that with everybody. Blending and segmenting as reversible processes. So making sure we're doing lots of word building, lots of reading. So reading and writing as reversible. And focusing in on that practice. Lots of opportunities for blending and segmenting words. That's what we want to be spending our time doing during that phonics session. And then, of course, applying that. So making sure we've got those purposeful opportunities for application. There's a free monitoring prompt for English leaders that we've put together to support, but it's useful to give to everybody who's involved in teaching phonics so they can check their own, okay, where am I with this? We have a new session that I run on phonics subject knowledge for primary. So it's about an hour. There's live sessions which are available for individual teachers, but then you can buy the recording for your whole school. So if that's useful. There's also a session which is new, which is called the Science of Reading. So again, that's available. You can come as an individual 2 for 1, but you can also buy a recording for your whole school, or you can sign your whole school up to the live session too. But I know that's harder. That's why we offer the recording for an unlimited access. I run a whole day on Phonics First, which looks at generic teaching practice for phonics, for teachers and TAs. I also run phase 1 phonics, so please just signpost your nursery teams to that. And I just wanted to mention phonically decodable books, because of course that's in the deep dive. So and it's something that comes up from schools a lot in feedback from Ofsted, making sure that the book that's in their book bag that goes home, the phonically decodable one, is close. The children know the sounds that they need to be able to blend that book. And making sure that we are very clear with Ofsted, very explicit about what the books in their book bags are for. So yes, they'll have one that is phonically regular, closely matched. This is reception 1. They'll have one that is to share with parents, and carers, and they might have one that is a copy of a book that's been read aloud in class, for example, for rereading. So just being explicit about what the books in the book bags are for, essentially, because that's something that they're looking for. I also put a link on your resource page to an audit, to quite a few audits actually that we've put together. There's one for phonics and early reading. There's one for reading in general, which looks more at comprehension. There's one for grammar, etc., etc. So they're useful documents if you're looking at that aspect of reading or writing as a school, if that's a priority for you, just to sort of sit back and reflect on, okay, where are we as a school with this? So just some questions to get us thinking about school self-evaluation. And the top tip from subject leaders I've spoken to is making sure this bit is obvious to inspectors, that we're determined that every pupil will learn to read, regardless of their background needs or abilities. And recent feedback from subject lead who had Ofsted during the inspection, he said that every child should be passing that year one phonics screening check, with the exception of children in exceptional circumstances. So, and he gave the example of a child who had Down syndrome. So just the expectation is that every child passes that year one screening check, and that's the feedback that I've had from schools. So we've mentioned this earlier. So children at risk of falling behind identified within the first 3 weeks, and then they have that additional support. And this just comes from the handbook, of course. We all know this, I think, this business of pupils, Ofsted paying particular attention to pupils who are reading below age-related expectation, and making sure we've got a catch-up programme for them, what they're having that intervention. If you're looking for something for intervention at Key Stage 2, then get hold of this document. It's available to look at online. It's Brooks's What Works for Literacy Difficulties. So I put the link here for you, and the 6th edition is the one that you're looking for. And what this document does is it considers lots of different literacy intervention programs, and it tells you what the impact of those programs, because of course Ofsted want to know, are you using an evidence-based program for intervention? So if you're looking for something, have a look at this. And also, lots of our schools in Cornwall know this lady, Heather. She runs Reading Rocks. If you haven't heard about it, have a look. She is amazing. And knows an awful lot about books, and she puts together book boxes for school. She can put together book boxes for your class, and you get it as a little, lovely little parcel in the post. But she will also put together book boxes for individual children. So and lots of schools are using their pupil premium money to in this way, so thinking about getting the right books in the hands of children. So have a look at her website, it's great. We also run catch-up phonics session. I've got a session coming up next week, so if that's something that's useful for your teaching assistants or any teachers at Key Stage 2, then have a little look on our website at the outline for that catch-up phonics session. And I also run a specific session for leaders on phonics. The other thing that schools are saying is make sure that your intent and your implementation for reading and writing and phonics is communicated effectively. Of course, with your school team, but also with parents. Remember, the first place that Ofsted look is your website. So, make sure that you put as much information on your website as possible, so that they look at your website and think, oh, these guys know what they're talking about. This is really nice, actually. If you have a look at this one, this comes from a school in Cornwall, Tranach. What they've done is they've looked at those 7 deep dive questions, the 7 aspects of reading, they've called them, and they've put together on their website their vision for those 7 aspects of reading. So I think that's really nice to have that really upfront for Ofsted and for parents, of course. And don't forget on your website to communicate your focus on vocabulary, because of course we know the impact of children having a broad and deep vocabulary is priceless. So share this quote, and lots of schools that I'm working with are popping this on their school website. Researchers in the United States who've looked at the impact of parents reading with their children quoted the following figures in a news release about their findings. Here's how many words kids would have heard by the time they were 5 years old. Never read to, 4,662 words. If they're read to 1 to 2 times a week, 3 to 5 times a week, daily, wow, and 5 books a day is a massive jump, isn't it? So really important to help them understand how important it is to be reading to children all the way through to the end of primary. I'd also have this on my website for parents, reading stories to children, which comes from the framework Appendix 1, really useful for parents. If you're interested in vocabulary, then have a look. Tree runs a fab session on vocabulary. She's not going to be doing it for the next couple of months, but we've got sessions running again in March, I think. I've talked about the reading audit, you have that on your link, and I've talked about this reading deep dive questions for primary school, so that's you'll have that document with you. We're moving on to the next section, which is top tips for improving writing across primary. I'm realizing that we're running out of time as always, but for the next part of the session we'll look at writing. So looking at the research into writing, this is highlighted in all the research that we've read in terms of how effective schools get writing going and going well. Research has shown that when writing demands interaction with a reader, children write better texts. So as writer teacher Shelley Harwain explains, students need to see that their words can make a reader smile, sigh, nod, laugh, or even tear up. They need to see that their words can change their reader's behaviour or attitude, or make someone rethink an issue or solve a problem. So I would say that reading for a real audience and a real purpose in the real world, an authentic reason for reading, we know makes a difference to children's outcomes in writing, to what they produce. So I've got a few examples here from schools in Cornwall. This is a lovely one. Penzance in Cornwall created leaflets about sustainable fishing to give to members of the public. So they did lots of research, they created leaflets, they handed them out in Penzance at the top of Causeway Head. They also created recipe books, fish recipe books, and they were selling them to the public. The quality of what they produced was high because they knew that real people in the real world were not going to buy those recipe books if they weren't of a good quality, of good standard. We've got our local Sainsbury's. We've got schools who have created writing posters, etc., which have been displayed in the local supermarkets. Fabulous work. Get local shops involved, you know, so that we can work towards having that real audience. There's a local fish and chip shop as well, who which is really nice. So they were displaying, primary school displayed their writing in the chip shop because they knew that members of the public would be stood there waiting in a line, you know, in a queue, waiting for their fish and chips. So it was a, you know, captive audience essentially. We've got schools up in St Austell who had their film shown in a local cinema. So they had written a script to create into a film. They made it into a film, but they also had writing in the foyer too. Writing to real people, of course. Here we've got Penryn Jr., who wrote to David Walliams. Very often you will get you get a letter back, which is great. So writing to real people essential. If you haven't come across Pobble, of course, Pobble 365 is fab. That gives you an image every single day of the year to use to inspire writing. So really sumptuous images there and lots of prompts about how to inspire writing with that image. So that's really great, Pobble 365. But there's also another part of Pobble, which is about giving children a real audience. So you can sign up to Pobble, you can send your children's writing into Pobble, and they will they'll publish it on the website, and you can get feedback and fabulous because you know, real children are reading other children's writing, and you can sign in and look at examples of writing from other schools, etc. too. So it is a fabulous resource. If you haven't seen that side of Pobble, then do check it out. And also thinking about purposeful and authentic class writing projects that have children have an emotional stake in. That can make a real difference to how much effort they put into that writing. So things like writing to the ambassador of the Philippines in the UK and urging them to do all he can to help move Marley to a sanctuary. So Marley the elephant. So I've put the link in there for you. And a similar one, we had a project running in Cornwall based on freeing Morgan the orca, and children writing persuasive letters to free Morgan, essentially. And the quality of the writing was up there because the children were emotionally engaged in it. So real reasons, real purposes, authentic reasons for writing. On the next two slides, just have examples of, okay, where could our writing go? So I'm sure you could add to this. But if you think about some of the most successful writing units, they are often those units of work where we're sharing, where is this going? Who's going to be reading this? So really important when we're thinking about improving writing. The top tip for leaders is to make that happen, put a box on the planning for it. You know, if you've got a box on the planning, then it just prompts everybody to think about it. So, you know, what's the purpose? Who's my audience for the outcome? And it prompts us as teachers to share that with our classes as well. So reference on planning, and obviously it's going to be visible in books. The other top tip for improving writing is to do with content. So this comes from S. Alex Martin, this quote. He says, "My advice to writers is this: walk, talk, breathe, laugh, cry, fall, rise, fail, succeed, run, jump, love, hate, hide, seek, learn, work, play, feel, live. Then write it down." So we all write best about what we know. We all write best from real experience, or real or almost real experience, of course, because drama can cover this too. So, you know, where you're immersing children in experience through things like guided visualization, through things like acting it out, essentially. So that real experience can involve school trips, of course, visitors into the classroom, drama, real events, and film too. So, you know, I have seen some magical outcomes in terms of using visual literacy to support children, to give them the content for writing. And that it is about giving them content for writing is about inspiring them. But it also means that, you know, when children put pencil to paper or pen to paper, they have got so much going on cognitively. They've got to think about the process, the spelling, the handwriting, the punctuation, you know, the flow of ideas. We need to sometimes take away one of those balls and free them up to concentrate on the transcriptional side of writing. So making sure that they're secure with the content of writing, they know where their writing is going, can be really liberating for developing writers in particular. I love this example of content and experience for writing. This comes from one of our schools in Cornwall, where the children were doing a piece of writing that was linked to Wind in the Willows. And the piece of writing was the part of the story where Toad was careering round the lanes in his motor car, you know, boop, boop, round the corners, going whizzing around. And of course, the teacher couldn't give the children the experience of that. But what they did was they invited, I think they're called St. Evil, they invited the go-kart people into school, and the children had the opportunity to get into go-karts and whiz around the playground and feel the wind in their hair and, you know, career around. Now, what they did that was really successful was they captured the language immediately from that experience. And I think that's really important. Sometimes when we load experience for writing, sometimes there's too big a gap between the experience and the writing itself. And the children sort of forget and lose the vocabulary that gives the writing the flair that you want. So, as close to the experience as possible, capture the vocabulary. Let's generate the vocabulary around that experience, and let's capture it as something if we can't do the writing immediately. So, you know, take photographs, jot down the vocabulary for them, or get them jotting down that vocabulary so that they can use that in their writing. So real experience essential. And of course, we all know the importance of reading. If I asked you to tell me a fairy story, you could do it, couldn't you? Because you've got that vast knowledge to draw upon. You've got a well of characters to draw from. You've got the plot lines to draw from. You've got settings to draw from. You could mix and match those settings and those characters and those plot lines, and you could create a fairy story, a brand new fairy story, because you have been immersed in fairy story, either from a young age or through reading them yourselves to children. So you have what Pi Corbett calls that narrative storehouse to draw from, a deep well of plot lines, characters, settings. We can't invent from nothing. Our best writers are avid readers, and they draw quite naturally and effortlessly from their reading. Pi says, I'm sure you all know Pi Corbett, he says the most proficient writers in any class are always readers. It's impossible to write any type of text without being familiar with the linguistic patterns. The issue for many children is not so much a lack of imagination, but rather a lack of the building blocks with which to be imaginative. It is constant and avid reading that helps children build up a store of patterns and ideas. These become embedded within their imaginative and linguistic competence to be drawn upon when writing. Ask any author for advice about becoming a writer, and they always say the same thing: read, read, read. The reading makes the writer. And so often in schools, when we've got writing as our issue, we feel like we need to do more writing, and that will help. But actually, what we need to do is spend more time reading, because we need to soak children in the syntactical patterns of that type of text. We need to soak them in the structure of that type of text. So what does it mean for the classroom? It means read aloud every day, frequently, and with enthusiasm, fiction, non-fiction, and poetry. Yes, to develop their reading and inspire them to become readers themselves, but also to help them with their writing. And one of the reasons that reading aloud helps children with their writing is that it exposes them to the structure of different texts. And if we want to improve fiction writing, if we want to improve our story writing, it's really important to teach children plotline. And it's one of the key gaps that I come across all the time in primary curriculum, actually, because there is quite often there's a gap in terms of where do we teach plot lines. Now, we know that there are only a set number of plot lines, of patterns for stories. So they can be categorized like this. So wishing tales, warning tales, defeating the monster tales, finding tales, quest tales, rags to riches, character flaw, and a repetitive tale, which tends to happen in the nursery and reception. But children only need a very simple plot line to hang their ideas from. And some of our good writers, even if they haven't internalized simple plot lines, it can impact really quite negatively on their fiction writing. So as a school, if you're looking to improve fiction writing, I would suggest one of the things that will make a difference to fiction writing is making sure that we select, okay, what plot lines are we going to teach at Key Stage 1? What plot lines are we going to teach at Key Stage 2? So that children, when they start to write a story, they have got a sequence to go through, a beginning, a middle, and an end. They know what happens in a story, and they can hang different ideas from that coat hanger. And we only need maybe one or two, maximum two plot lines in Key Stage 1. And maybe 3 at Key Stage 2, maybe 4. You decide as a school, but you don't need many, but you need to be secure with that plot line. You need to know the structure of the story. Just as with non-fiction, we know how a non-fiction text is organized, is structured, so that we can write, instruction always starts like this. We know the structure of it. We can organize our instructional writing, and we've internalized that structure. So, of course, one way of doing that is just to show the children that plot line. So here we've got a boxing up the text where we've got the 3 little pigs outline on the left-hand side, and we've extracted the basic plot. So that's the plot line you need to be teaching children for defeating the monster. And defeating the monster is a good one to teach them in Key Stage 1. So we know in Key Stage 1, we can write a Defeating the Monster story. We know that it starts with introducing the main characters. Everything's great. All is well. We know a monster appears and causes problems. Now, that could be a real monster or it could be a theoretical monster, particularly by the time you get into, year 3. The monster's difficult to defeat. The main characters defeat the monster, and then all is well again in the end. So a basic plot line. And of course, we also show our children how to hang our own ideas and recycle that plot line. So here we're changing it for Key Stage 1, and we're showing them that instead of 3 little pigs living with their mother, we've got 3 little mice living with their father. So we've innovated on it, essentially. And we can do the same for older children. So we can use that same plot line, and we can hang our ideas for an adventure, suspense, mystery story from that, Defeating the Monster plot line. So children playing on the beach, they find buried treasure in a cave. A monster appears and causes problems. Well, that monster could not be a real monster. It might just be a threatening man and a scary dog, etc., etc. So internalizing plotline, really important for children, and thinking about where does that come in our writing curriculum. But then giving children lots and lots of opportunities to invent their own stories using recycled plot lines. And we do that orally, right from reception. I've seen this sort of thing being used really well in the classroom, particularly for children who haven't got that breadth of reading experience. So we'd have little party bags with characters, and that will be full of Google images of characters that we know well from our stories. So we might have a troll, for example, in year 1. We might have a teenager. We might have a wicked witch or whatever it is. So we have some Google images there. And they could change as children go up into Key Stage 2. We'll have a party bag full of opening lines, and we're collecting those opening lines. So we know how to start our stories in different ways. We could start with speech. We could start with once upon a time. We could start with long, long ago in a distant valley. We're constantly collecting those opening lines. We've got a party bag full of settings. So we've got our spooky wood and our picture of our spooky wood. We've got our, our bedroom. We've got our school. We've got our beach, etc., etc. And then we've got our recycled plots. So that bag is full of, okay, we know in our class we're learning our Defeating the Monster plot line, and we might be learning our character flaw or whatever it is, or our quest story. So we might have 2 plot lines in there that we can, that are visually accessible for the children. And then we might have things like magical objects that we'll draw in to our stories. So creating stories orally, a 5-minute story, and we can be doing this every single class. We need children to have the opportunity to recycle the plots that we're teaching them and come up with those storylines swiftly. So it's a lovely experience when it's going well and the children are used to it. Initially, I saw this done right at the very beginning of year 1, where it was like pulling teeth. The teacher was doing it with the whole class. Once upon a time there was and no one had anything to say. So we'll draw out our character. There's a dragon, great, who lived in a, and so we do that again and again and again and again, so the children get used to creating. The other thing for improving writing is, for non-fiction, top tip is loiter with non-fiction. I think and I'm definitely guilty of this, we need more than a fleeting analysis if we want them to write non-fiction well. So remember, again, as with fiction, we don't need to do loads and loads of different plot lines. We don't need to do loads and loads of different text types of non-fiction. We need to strategically think as a school, what text types are we teaching? What text types do we want children to leave us in year 6 that they've mastered by the time they leave us in year 6? And we need to think about what that progression looks like. We might decide to do instructional text every year. Great, so they're able to do that really well by the time they leave in year 6. But then there's implications for right, how does that model text progress? What does the language look at and like, and how does it build year on year in terms of our model or our mentor text? So we decide as a school, which non-fiction are we teaching? How are we going to build progression year on year so that children can write a really good persuasive text by the time they leave us in year 6, for example? Think about explanation text. Maybe we don't want our children to be able to write an explanation text. Let's put that to the side. Thinking very clearly about what do we want our children to be able to write in terms of non-fiction, and immersing them in that language. So yes, we might be analysing one key text off by heart, but then we're making sure we have lots of opportunities for children to read and loiter with that particular text type. I've just popped this on here for you. This is something that we used a long time ago. It's called, they were called progression papers from the National Literacy Strategy, but Wilton School have updated them a little bit, and I think they're really useful. So the original progression papers were really great, because what they did was they unpicked the text structure, the grammatical features, and gave you tips about planning and preparing that particular text type. But Wilton, what they've done is they've sort of slotted it in with they've brought out the grammar of our current curriculum and thought about where that sits in terms of the different text types. So I've put the link there. Wilton Primary are happy to share that. So do have a look at that if you're thinking about progression in particular in non-fiction. If you want more top tips, I realise I'm 6 minutes over, folks. I'm sorry. If you want more top tips in terms of writing, we're running a whole day on writing what works. I'm not sure when it is, but it is coming up. So writing what works, which looks at all of those aspects in detail, plus lots more. I hope you've had this. We sent this out. This is our English Planner Spring. So we're doing one of these every single term. So you will get another one for the summer term, which just highlights key dates, key English dates for the school diary. So if you haven't received that, it's on our website and the link is here. And I've popped some of those key dates here for you. So we've got Handwriting Day coming up, but there's also a link, and the link is in the planner as well. So there's a link to a website that will support you in terms of resources for your school. So we've got National Storytelling Week. So Literacy Trust have got loads of great resources there for National Storytelling Week. We've got Wicked Writers Competition. So that's for children aged 9+, but I put the link there for you. Of course, it's Children's Mental Health Week on the 5th of February. We've got World Read Aloud Day on the 7th of February and World Wildlife Day on the 3rd of March. And 4th of March is National Grammar Day. I've popped some of our grammar training there for National Grammar Day. There is a free session, if you haven't seen it, for Grammar for Leaders. So if you could highlight that with anyone who would find that useful in your school, it's available to watch on our website. So just go to our website, look at the free training, and there's a Grammar for Leaders session there that I run. We do grammar games, and that's free for NQTs and ECTs. So if you could pass that on to any NQTs and ECTs, that would be really useful. All they need to do is email me if they want to attend. I run a session on subject knowledge and a whole day on grammar, which looks at grammar in context. And I've got a new session teaching punctuation in Key Stage 1. So it's a short session, it's about an hour, I think, and that's coming up soon. We've got World Book Day, 7th of March, and International Women's Day on the 8th of March. I popped the link there to some Love Reading for Kids, because they've got some really good suggestions for that day. And we've got British Science Week. We've got Shakespeare Week, and again, we've got links there for all of those days. And just to be aware, in the summer term coming up next, we've got things like International Children's Book Day, World Health Day, and Earth Day as well coming up. But I will send you all the summer planner at the end of this term, so you've got those dates, those next dates for the summer term. Don't forget, we've got all of those training sessions available for whole school training. So whole school training for £300. So we've got Tree runs sessions on editing. I run subject knowledge for grammar. We've got spelling games, grammar games. I run focus on fluency, improving inference, which is a really good one, looking at the importance of things like background knowledge and vocabulary, for example. So inference, really interesting session, 2-hour session on inference. We've got sessions on growth mindset, vocabulary, oracy, reciprocal reading, guided reading, and guided writing. So they're all available for individual teachers, so 2 for 1, but they're also available as a train your whole school for £300. And we have unlimited, this is a massive deal, this is unlimited access for a whole year. So for £499, you can send all teachers, teaching assistants on different sessions, on different dates and times, to all 12 sessions. So that's a massive saving if that's useful. So if you want to come on, more than one session, that's good value. So do drop us an email if you're interested in that. And the next few slides just have training days that are coming up. So whole day on teaching grammar, where we look at subject knowledge, contextualized teaching, and games for grammar. I do separate games for grammar for school leaders. There's a free recording on our website. We've got Key Stage 2 SAT Success coming up. It sounds scary, but it isn't. It's full of really fun, motivating activities for children that, as a sideline, children will jump through that hoop in terms of their end of Key Stage 2 SATs. So if end of Key Stage 2 SATs is something that's interesting to you, then do check that out. And we also have Achieving Greater Depth sessions, so Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2. So thinking about more able pupils, and that's on a unlimited across both sessions. So you can send up to 4 people, Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2. But you have to email us for that, so it can be split over both days. And if you're interested in a whole day on Ofsted Reading Ready, we do a whole day on Ofsted Reading Ready, and at the moment it's on an offer, unlimited places for your school, but you have to email me to have a little look. It's a really nice quote there from Tribal School about our support with Ofsted Reading, being Ofsted Reading Ready. So thank you, Tribal, very nice. Okay, folks, I realise I've gone way over, so I'm really sorry to eat into your day further. If you do have any questions, then I'm available now to answer any questions immediately if I can. But if not, if you have to rush off, then do drop me an email if you have any questions about this or anything else. Thank you very much, folks, and thank you those of you who are sticking with me to the end of the session. I hope you found it useful. Thank you, everybody.